Okay, so I'm going to make this one very quick because I've made similar videos before, but just want to make a case in point. This is Ring Magazine from 1995, featuring the Tyson McNeely fight. If you're a boxing fan, you probably know about this one. It was typical of a Tyson fight, very short, very one-sided, but McNeely was, very brave, very courageous, went forward, done what he could, but he was just overwhelmed, basically. There's lots of footage online. You know, often feel sorry for Tyson opponents, lesser known ones, because you type in their name to YouTube, and the only videos that will come up is their loss to Mike Tyson, rather than all the other fights they may have had. So this sort of shows the subject nature. Mitch Match. Don't tell Peter McNeely. Anyway, I was just kind of browsing online, and I came across a press conference from that. And it was almost like a scene from Rocky Five. If you've seen the film Rocky Five, McNeely basically says, "You guys can laugh." He's talking to the media here. Um, Don King had just cracked a joke, gave the white guy a chance or something like that. Anyway, McNeely obviously took exception to that, and he said, "You guys can laugh, but you know, if you're not facing Tyson, you guys have a dump in your pants or something like that." McNeely wasn't the most eloquent of speakers, but how many boxers are? That's beside the point. I basically totally support what he was saying. And I'll make this very quick, but basically, if you look at most boxing videos, you see an awful lot of comments, and this probably reflects the real world situation of boxing fans, with a lot of internet tough guys, as I would call them. And they disrespect guys like Peter McNeely, who are not wonderful fighters, but they're beaten by great fighters. Now, I have no respect whatsoever for people who condemn someone else's efforts when they're trying to do something. And I'm talking about boxing, but this is a general rule in life, but they don't have the guts to do it themselves. So it could be boxing, it could be another sport, it could be some sort of other physical endurance. You know, give the guy credit for trying. He tried, it was very one sided, and he lost. But how many of those who ridicule Peter McNeely had the guts to do what he'd done? This is something that, as much as I'm a boxing fan, it's one aspect of the sport I really dislike, what I call plastic fans. If you're a real boxing fan, you would not disrespect a fighter in that way. It's one thing just stating the fact he's mismatched, Tyson's going to dominate him, etc., etc. And I'm just using this as a famous example. There's many, many other examples. But what I can't stomach is when people just lower the bar to disrespecting someone. My message is, unless you've done it yourself, then you've got fuck all to say. And even if you have done it yourself, it still lowers the bar. You should have some sort of empathy because you know what it takes to step between those ropes. So I have zero respect for any so-called boxing fan that disrespects a fighter in that way. And I admit it is something that really pisses me off because it degrades the sport when people bring that sort of attitude to the table. I mean, this is not new. In the 1930s, when Joe Louis fought, there was a so-called Bum of the Month club. That was basically guys that were being dominated by Joe Louis. They weren't bums. They were brave men who faced one of the greatest heavyweights who ever lived, arguably the greatest heavyweight who ever lived. So there's no such thing as cowardice or bums in boxing. I just don't believe that. Sure, like any sport, you're going to have a hierarchy. You're going to have great fighters, you're going to have pretty good fighters, you're going to have average fighters, and you're going to have guys that aren't that great. But at least give someone credit for trying. I understand, there's corruption in boxing and you get fixed fights and so on. And that's a different matter. But I'm talking about when someone really has tried their best and they're just dominated. It's just, it's something that in a fight, you're always going to have one guy that's better than another. Ideally, you would have a situation where, it's always an even match, but that's just not realistic. Politics of boxing just doesn't work that way. So, my message to fellow fans is, and I know this isn't everyone, but there is far too many of these idiots online, and I call them internet tough guys because they say this shit behind a screen. But I confronted one of them and it just said, "Well, yeah, tell me about the time you fought Mike Tyson." And it's a serious point because Peter McNeely went in, he was dominated, but he done it. That's the point. He faced Mike Tyson. Now, how many other people in the world can say that? Only a few dozen other people can actually say that. 55 other people to be precise. So, I've no respect for people who come out with this trash talking of fighters. It's different if, a fighter has a bad personality and they're not exactly doing themselves any favors by trash talking opponents with a bad personality if there's a legitimate reason to criticize them. But in terms of the boxing side of things, it basically disgusts me that there are so called fans who think that they can hide behind their computer screen and disrespect men who are much braver than they are. It's a bit like disrespecting a soldier in the sense of condemning them if you're not willing to do it yourself. It's You have to respect courage because courage isn't always about victory. Courage can just be about stepping up and trying to do something. Courage is not always about victory. It's equally courageous to go in, try your best, and lose. I'm not saying loss is something to be proud of, but it's not. In a combative sport like boxing, where there's an enormous amount of ego and machismo involved, it's. I really believe you have to respect any man or woman. There's an increasing number of female martial artists as well. You have to respect people for taking the courage to step between those ropes. Even if you don't like their personality, that's a different matter. Fine, criticize other aspects of the personality, whatever it may be. But to disrespect someone just point blank like that disgusts me, quite frankly. But on the other hand, fighters themselves should have confidence that they know themselves they're doing it. I would quote Teddy Roosevelt, and actually a number of fighters have quoted Teddy Roosevelt because it's a great. Can't remember the whole speech, but he basically said, "It's not the critic that counts; it's the man who is in the heat of the arena." You probably know the speech I'm talking about if you're familiar with Teddy Roosevelt. It's a great speech, and it's very very apt. What Roosevelt was saying was that critics can condemn the strong man, the man who tries, the brave guy, but they count for shit unless they're prepared to do it themselves. And it's very apt in this sport. And that applies to all fighters. Actually, George Groves quoted that after his loss to Carl Froch in their second fight. And it's very, very apt.